Alright, let's try this. Again, let's try this intro. Third time's a charm. I don't know if I'm going to keep this part in, but this is my third time doing the intro. The first two were bad. Um, the first two were bad. The first one, I just sort of stumbled over my words and went off script a bit. And also, I wasn't pronouncing my words well. And then the first time it was just bad. So yeah, let's try this again in 3, 2, 1. Hello, my beautiful kingdom. It is I, your king here, back with another video. It's been a while. And yeah, it's been a while since I've uploaded a video, and the first video I upload is me doing a Wattpad review. In this new series I like to call Wattpad Reviews. So, what is Wattpad Reviews? Essentially, I read Wattpad stories, and then I review them. Like how regular people review regular books. Yeah, that's the basic premise. I read Wattpad stories and then I review them. There's nothing much else to that. I'll review a variety of things from romance to action to anything in between. The only thing I might not do is fan fictions. That's probably going to be later on down the line kind of thing. Right now, it's just going to be solely original works. Though I'm not going to be beholden to a certain genre, right? It's not going to be exclusively romance or exclusively action. It's going to be a variety of things. Whenever I'm reviewing, I'm not going to be a harsh reviewer, mostly because these stories that I'm reviewing were made for free, so I don't feel like I really have the right to just go in and tear these stories apart. I'm not going to be like Anthony Fantano or Gordon Ramsay, where I'm just going to say, this sucks really bad, this sucks horribly, this is the worst thing I've ever read, right? No, I'm not going to do that. These are passion projects. They're not actually published books that are being printed and are making money, right? They didn't ask for some random mixed kid on YouTube to come along and review them and tear them to shreds, right? So I'm not going to do that. What I will be doing is I will be going over where I think a particular story's shortcomings are and what their problems are and why I personally had a problem with it. But whenever I talk about these problems, it'll always be in a soft and kind manner, and I'll always go out of my way, no matter what, to talk about what I liked about the story. So even if in the review I say, I didn't really like that story that much, it wasn't really my cup of tea, I didn't vibe with what I was doing, I didn't like certain parts of it, right? I'll always go out of the way to add a positive thing. There'll always be something positive about it. However, you should probably, if you like blah 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 blah, you should probably read this story then, right? That's I'm not going to be harsh. As I said, it's going to be fine, it's going to be regular. The only time I will be super harsh with a story, though, is when I have to pay for it. Because for those of you guys who don't know, there are some stories on Wattpad that you do have to pay for. And then at that point, you're just making money off this book, so people deserve to know how much I hate a story. So if I had to pay for it and I did hate a story, you will know. It will be harsh at that point, because it's not free. You're making money. You wrote that for money, right? At that point, let's just do it. Let's just go hard. All the gloves are coming off and all that, And yeah, that's pretty much the series. That's the intro. Yeah, without further ado, let's get into the review, shall we? I've tried doing this section 3 times. And I just sort of realized that I've worded a bunch of stuff weird in the script. So bear with me. So, short and sweet and its short-lived sequel, Short and Sweet number 2. I am so clever, aren't I? Are collections of short romance stories told by the author I Try, LOL. Each story, with a few exceptions, is a standalone story about romance. So one story might be about a couple who love each other, another might be about one person confessing to his best friend from childhood, and another just might straight up be about a girl letting herself get robbed because she's depressed. So, it's a real grab bag anthology series. And of course, this being an anthology series, some stories are going to be better than the others. That being said, in terms of quality, the worst stories in this collection are actually kind of good. Their only problem is that they're either too simple or generic, or that they don't really have us care that much about the characters for the ending of each story to be satisfying. I realize I worded that weird in the script. Essentially what I mean by that is essentially the stories themselves, there are some in here that don't make us care that much about the characters, and thus we don't really care if they end up together or not. That's what the problem with some of these stories. That being said, I am sort of willing to make an exception for that last point, considering that this is an anthology series where the characters are swapped out each chapter, so of course some stories are just going to do a better job at characterization than others, so I'm willing to make an exception for that. And as for the generic thing, I don't really hate generic stories in and of themselves. I only hate generic stories that are bad, right? So, and none of these generic stories are bad or done wrong, right? So really, if you like a generic story that is like done right, even the worst of these stories will be good for you. They were good for me too, as I said. So like I said, being generic isn't a crime on its own, as long as like it's not done bad, and no generic story within this collection is done bad, and that is a huge plus for me personally. So the worst stories of this collection being kind of good leaves a lot of room for the best stories of this collection to like actually shine, right? Like there are so many good stories here that I genuinely love. There are stories where the exposition hits just right, where the dialogue is amazing to read, and where I feel for the characters despite having only just met them. Like, those stories genuinely surprised me. I don't read many short stories, so I went with this sort of low expectation, lenient vibe where I was prepared to forgive a lot of these stories for problems that stem from the fact that they're only one chapter each, so they didn't have time for characterization or setting up a setting or anything like that, essentially. Then, when I read the first chapter, and I was pleasantly surprised. Like, talk about a tone setter. Like, the first chapter is genuinely great, and it's a great tone setter. Well, I wouldn't say it's like the best story within this collection. It was a great story to start with, and that's like one of the great comments I have. It's a great first chapter. It set the tone well and caused me to readjust my expectations for this collection of short stories. It was an amazing first impression. Then from there, I just kept being surprised about how good every other story seemed to be. There are some legitimate shining stories in this collection that make the entire thing like worth reading, right? But even without those shining stories, this collection would be good anyway. I definitely recommend you give this one a read, especially if you're like me and don't really mind generic and simple stories. Like if you're like me, then like even half of these stories will just be good to you, right? But there are some of these that are like genuinely amazing that I love a lot. Overall, this gets an 8 out of 10, and the Kang's seal of approval. I love it. So now we're going to do something that like I want to do when I review like short collections of short stories, right? Where I essentially go over my top 5 picks for what I think are the best stories of the collection, and then give one example of a weak story, so that way you can like have a better idea of what you're going into with this series, right? I'm going to try my best to avoid spoilers, but if you want to go in completely blind, then I recommend you just cut off here and go read the short story collection. Like I said, it's short and sweet, and a sequel, Short and Sweet number 2 by I-Try LOL. It's a great, like, I just love it a lot. So, let's go into our top 5, starting with number 5, Laundrette Part 2. So, one, the person who wrote this is, at the very least, from Europe. I think they're British, though. I think they are British, though. So I don't know how to pronounce that. I just know it's like, for us Americans, it would be known as the laundromat, right? But essentially, Laundrette Part 2 is one of like a few sequels in this. This is something the short story collection does a lot. It usually has part 2s. It has like a few part 2s. It doesn't have many part 2s, but it has a few part 2s. And this is the best sequel by default, mostly because I like the first one a lot, and like this does everything that Shade Fearless says a perfect sequel does, right? So, but the reason this is in my top 5 is because there's a trope that's used in here that's handled well, because it's handled realistically. I can't say any more than that without spoiling it, but it used that trope realistically, and it honestly helped guide me into loving the relationship of this duology a lot more than I would if it had just played that trope straight. That's all I'll say. Now on to number 4, Poltergeist. I just love it mainly for the concept, right? Like, it's one of those stories where it has an interesting concept and it does it well enough, right? There were like ways in which it could have been done better, but like those are ultimately just like nitpicks, right? I just love the concept a lot, and I love how the way it was done. It's basically the story about this girl who's a ghost, and no one can see her until this one boy sees her, right? That's not a spoiler because it gets more. There's like more to it than that afterwards, but like I love this story a lot. It was very heartwarming when I first read it. There are a lot of like weird implications within it, but if you don't think about those I'm going to get canceled for that, aren't I? If I sit, I'm not going to credit. There are a lot of weird implications about that, but like I found this story heartwarming, right? So I love this. I love this a lot. It's my number 4. And now number 3 and number 2. Yeah, this next one. This next one we got a tie actually between these two stories, Promise and Peter. Yeah, it's a tie. I love both these stories a lot, and it's for the same reason. They're both the very best of like the generic stories here.
they tell like really generic stories. Like one is like a friends to lovers kind of situation, and the other is like about a jock staying with a smart girl, right? The thing that like put these head and shoulders above, like even like the two that are above here, right, is the fact that these two relationships felt real. I don't know how, but they did feel real. Like I can imagine these pairings before and after events of the story in a way that I really couldn't with the others, right? And that realness just put it over the edge above the other stories that I'd call generic. If I'd have to describe it, I'd call these stories the Asura's Wraths of this collection. For those guys who don't know, Asura's Wrath is a game with a painfully generic story. Like it's very generic. Like it's a story you've seen all the time. And yet, I'd be willing to call Asura's Wrath one of my favorite games of all time because of that generic story. I don't call many things masterpieces, but that game is a masterpiece because of that generic story. When I compare something to Asura's Wrath, it's the highest honor I could bestow. These stories are the Asura's Wrath, where it tells these two generic stories, but it's amazing anyway, and that's why I love them. Now on to number 1, voicemails. This is just a great concept, and like this is like Poltergeist, but the concept is done really well. Where if you couldn't tell from the name, it's a story only told through voicemails, and like there's like a lot of limitations that comes with that, right? You have no idea what the characters are thinking. You have no idea what the characters actually did. The only thing you know about the characters is through what they say. What they say happened and what like the words and like their dialogue and all that, right? And it takes a story that would have normally like I'm trying not to spoil it because I want you guys to read it, right? So I'm trying to be as vague as possible, while also conveying what I felt through it. But like it's using its limitations of us only knowing the story through what they say, and it takes these emotions that we'd feel normally from a story that goes the route this did, and it sort of amplifies. I hope that makes sense. It probably doesn't, but like just go read voicemails. If you're going to read any story from this collection, read voicemails. Like I'm being so serious when I say this. It's probably my favorite short story ever, not just a part of this collection, but like ever. I love it that much because it just uses its concept amazingly to like tell this great and quite honestly beautiful story that I love a lot. So yeah, now on to what I think is the weakest story. And now, just because this is the weakest story doesn't mean it's bad, right? Like, I've read stories that are way worse than this one, right? But the worst story for me is this one called I Missed You, because it's a sequel, right? But it's not labeled as a sequel. It's a sequel to one earlier on called Ice Skating, right? And the thing I don't like about I Miss You is the fact that it focuses too much on exposition, right? It focuses too much on exposition, and because of that, everything else feels half-baked. Like, the main point of the story is the fact that this girl is waiting for this guy at this bus stop who she hasn't seen in a long time, right? They're like long distance for like a bit or something like that. She hasn't seen him for a while. He went to go take care of him, and now she's sort of like wondering, hey, will he still like me? Will he even miss me? What did he think about me while I was gone, or while he was gone, right? It's that sort of deal, right? The thing is, I like this concept, that as a concept a lot. The thing is, it's sort of focusing on backtracking and explaining what happened in the last story, rather than trying to tell a story of its own. And because of that, everything feels kind of half-baked, right? And that's most of my problem with some of the weaker stories in this collection, is that they have good concepts, and I can see where they're trying to go with it, but they feel half-baked. Like, they need like a few more like paragraphs, like they need just like longer time to cook, if that makes sense. Like, they just needed something more to it to actually make it good, you know? If that makes sense. That being said, there's like not a story I'm willing to call bad, though. Like I said, even the weakest story is good, but like, yeah, nah. Anyway, that's it for Wattpad reviews. Please go read Short and Sweet by I-Try. LOL, it's really good. And yeah, thanks for watching. Bye.